Good evening, everyone. My name is Erik Flesch, and I am the director of the Mining and Rollo Jameson Museums, and welcome to this third of 7 presentations as part of the 2021 Winter Lyceum. Today is the 28th day of February 2021, and I'm broadcasting from Platteville, Wisconsin, home of the world's largest letter M on beautiful Platte Mound in the heart of the Upper Mississippi Valley Lead Mining District, where the Badger State was born. This is a special year for our museums. 2021 marks the 50th anniversary of the opening of the Mining Museum back in 1971, the 45th anniversary of the opening of the Bevins Lead Mine in the museum's backyard, that was 1976, and the 40th anniversary of the opening of the Rollo Jameson Museum in 1981. We've got many programs and initiatives in store for this special year that celebrate human ingenuity, inquiry, enterprise, and development, what might be called the pioneering spirit in the context of our region over a very long timeline. I invite you to stay up to date on these and many more programs designed to inspire optimism in our community and to connect Platteville's past to its bright future. You can make your reservations and donations online at www.mining.jameson.museum. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's Lyceum to enjoy a presentation by Jeff Schave titled From Beetown to Atlanta, The Tale of a Civil War Drum. I'd like to thank all of you who have registered to participate live today, as well as those who may be watching our recording of this event from our library of virtual programs. I extend a warm welcome to current friends of the Mining and Rollo Jameson Museum's members and donors, and I'd like to thank the sponsors whose financial support has made this program possible: Taco John's, H&R Block, A&W Restaurant of Platteville, Inspiring Community, and Southwest Health. And now, before we begin our program, I'd like to invite you to participate in a question and answer session at the end of this evening's presentation. Because we're a group of around 130 tonight, and we are doing this via Zoom, in the interest of time, I'd like to invite you to type out your questions as they come to mind and to submit them via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen during the talk. So please take a moment and look for that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. At the end, Jeff Schave will answer as many of the questions as he's able to in the order in which they're received. So I'm now pleased to introduce tonight's speaker. Jeff Schave is a retired music and history teacher from Platteville High School. Along with his wife, Cindy, Jeff enjoys participating in living history events, including the Platteville Historic Reenactment, which Jeff and Cindy helped to found 24 years ago. Jeff finds personal satisfaction in researching and writing about the participants and related topics pertaining to the American Civil War. Percussion and drums have always been a considerable part of Jeff's DNA. It is my great honor to welcome Jeff Schave.
Thank you, Erik. What a wonderful introduction, and I so much appreciate the opportunity this evening to be with you. Thank you to all of my Zoom friends that are coming in this evening to watch the presentation. I appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule to be with us. I actually wanted to also make mention that I really enjoyed and want to extend congratulations to both Patrick and Dr. Gene Tesdall and his distinguished panel on the last couple of presentations. I enjoyed them immensely and I learned a great deal. So thank you very, very much for that. Before we begin, I just kind of wanted to throw out a thought to everybody and kind of set the stage. When I think about history, I think about, yes, of course, the dates and I think about all the events that we study in school and this and that, and yeah, that's history. It really is. And it's not to be, it's nothing to ignore. But truthfully, whether history is either oral or written down, what it really boils down to in the whole scheme of things, I really feel as though it boils down to a large part of just being persons, places, and things. In other words, I kind of wonder out loud about what certain artifacts might be able to say to us if we ever were to give them a voice. We actually, we look at different artifacts and we think, well, what was the story behind that? What was Grandma's grandfather clock in the corner all about? What did she see? What did the clock see? What museum piece? We really, well, that's great, but I wonder if it could only talk, what it could tell us. And these are the things, I don't know about you, but this is the kind of things that once in a while, even Grandpa's old lunchbox and beat up thermos, what kind of story would that tell? So to be honest with you, it's always been something that I've wondered about. And so if we could only put a voice to some of these artifacts, we might learn something. So tonight, what we're going to try to do with a real rare and unique artifact that's right here in the museum's collections is we're going to try to tell a story, and we're going to try to give that artifact a voice. So, a Civil War drum in its tail, from Beetown to Atlanta. Now, together tonight, we'll take part of that long journey, and that journey will take us literally from most of the part of the United States on the eastern side of the Mississippi. We're going to be traveling that, and we're going to be talking about those places. But we will attempt, like I said, to give voice to a certain artifact and tell its tale. So ever since Cindy and I moved to Platteville, and that's going on about 43 years ago, I've always been drawn to the museum and the displays. And, one of the things that I really have always kind of really looked at and really wondered about before even delving into the more research is I saw the drum upstairs, being a lifelong percussionist, and I saw this picture of these 5 guys. And, I was really like, wow, that's pretty cool. And yeah, there's that drum in that picture. So I always thought it was pretty cool. So I read it, and of course, Rollo's recollection was that 2 men are in that picture, Burt Sumner and James Hayden. And it says Company C, 25th Wisconsin. So like, wow. So I wonder if there's more to that story. So my initial research did reveal that Burt and Sumner did enlist on August 12th in 1862 at the age of 23. James Hayden, he enlisted 1 day later. He must have gone home and convinced them to do it on August 13th, 1862, and he was 19. Now, both of the men enlisted in Lancaster. Now, one curious thing is, the first thing I did is I looked up service records of those 2 names. And Burt has to be looked up as Burton, because otherwise I wasn't able to find it. But besides the point, I'm kind of thinking that Burton's the guy with the snare drum that's actually pictured there. And on your screen, he's the one on the far left. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about that. The drum itself is an interesting artifact. I did examine it, and it's about 15 inches across the head, and it's about 8.5 inches deep. The heads are calfskin. The snares are catgut, which is we can talk about later if you want to, and the rim is made of wood. And so it's a really interesting piece. Now, so after they enlisted in the Army, they both went up on the 14th of September. That's about a month later. They went up to join up with the 25th Wisconsin Regiment, and they became part of Company C. They went up to Camp Salomon, and that's up there near La Crosse. But more on Camp Salomon in a moment, and more on the 25th Wisconsin in just a moment. But right now, I think what we have to do is I'd like to introduce to you my co-presenter tonight. Now, my co-presenter, I better move the screen. Yeah, whoops, I'll get this sooner or later. My co-presenter is a drum from Cindy's and my personal Civil War drum collection. This drum is sitting right here next to me right now, and these drumsticks are original Civil War drumsticks. The reason I selected the drum, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, why not play the actual artifact if you're going to give it its voice? Well, I respect the age, I respect the wear on the head. I think basically it's a good idea not to take the specimen off the shelf. In case of an abundance of caution, we want to just be careful. that we don't do any damage. So I'm thinking to myself, what do I do? Well, why don't I bring in a Civil War drum from home that's been professionally restored, and it's very similar, wood rim, metal body. It's exactly the same kind of drum. So I'm thinking to myself, well, this will probably work. So this is my co-presenter, and he wants to say hello to you. He should sound a lot like, if not exactly like, the drum upstairs. And he wants to say hello. So I made my introduction to my co-presenter, and he is happy about that. Now I want to talk a little bit about the 25th Wisconsin. So as I mentioned, these two guys, they go up to Camp Salomon, and they join the 25th Wisconsin on September 14th. Well, their commander up there is a man by the name of Milton Montgomery. He's colonel. And there's another guy that's a major up there, a pretty significant guy. His name is Jeremiah Rusk. Now, Jeremiah Rusk is a major right now. Before that, he was in the legislature of Wisconsin, but now he's a major in the 25th Wisconsin. And for the most part, the hard lifting on getting these recruits was done by Jeremiah Rusk. Now, later on, as a side, it bears noting that he will then later become our 15th governor of this state of Wisconsin. He'll serve from 1882 to 89, but that's another story. We've got to stick on this one. So right now, they're up there. They're all coming in from all over the different places. Companies are being formed into the regiment. And this is a picture of what a company hat would look like. Bugle means infantry. 25 means the regiment. I was not able to find one with a C on it, but that's Company A. And that should represent the 25th Wisconsin. Now, who's in this company? Well, this company is made up mainly from our part of the state with farmers and lumbermen. But here's a list of the other occupations and the other things that the men and guys did before they joined up for the 25th. There were teachers, there were lawyers, engineers, clerks, even preachers, carpenters, students, blacksmiths, draftsmen. There are a lot of folks in there coming from communities all over this part of the state, big and small, and they're joining up and they're answering Lincoln's call to sign up for 3-year. It's a 3-year commitment at this point in time. Early in the war, very early, it was 3 months, but things got pretty bad pretty quick. A little bit about the regiments in the 25th. First of all, the 25th had 10 companies. The companies are actually listed alphabetically, A through K, with no J. I'm not quite sure why, but no J. So if you go A through K, omit the J, you're going to end up with 10 companies. Now, each company has about 100 men in it. And so with the officers, 10 times 100, and then there's, with the officers, well over 1,000 men, would be in this regiment. Also, as a quick aside before I move ahead, and I'm going to make this fast, I really enjoyed last week when Dr. Tesdall's, one of his distinguished guests, Dr. Arms, was talking about his relatives or his ancestors that had actually served in black units during the Civil War. And they were from Cherokee Valley north here. And I remember him talking about 2 of his relatives. One was in the 50th Wisconsin and one was in the 42nd. Now notice the high numbers there, because I have a point to make here in a second. Wisconsin had 53 total regiments, okay? So when Dr. Arms's relatives were able to join the Army, they were actually then able to join the Army because the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st took effect January 1st in 1863. That then made it available or allowable, because up to that time it was not allowable, to have black units. So what happened then is they made their long walk from Cherokee Valley over to Prairie. They joined up. One of them was a percussionist, and you'll excuse me, I can't remember which one. And that drum was noted that it is on display in Madison, I believe at the Veterans Museum. Now, Dr. Tesdall texted me too, and he wondered if maybe at some point during the, and I thought about this too. I thought about, during the war, maybe those 2 drums kind of met up and kind of checked notes. Well, we won't know that, but after tonight, we might know a little bit more of things. So moving ahead, I would like to show you a piece of music here. Now, this is when percussionists go in, or when musicians go in to the Army, one would think that most of them would be able to read music. Now, this music is in the original notation of the day. It's not written like modern day music. I have a sneaky suspicion that only a few guys that went in really were musicians enough to read music. I think it's possible the vast majority of them were drummers, drummer boys that went along, and they'd have to learn their calls. We're going to call these calls drum calls. They would learn their calls by rote, or as we used to say as children, taking piano lessons, by heart. Okay, so it would be a teaching thing. But a word about percussionists and drums before I move ahead. These percussionist drummers were important people, not just because giving commands on the field was so important. The din of battle, the fog of the smoke, this and that, would make it hard sometimes to see flags to rally on their battalions or their units. And the drummers would give them the calls that would essentially be life-saving sometimes. Or most of the time, at least all the time, we give them direction. So they had an important part. Let me also say that percussionists and drums and all musicians sometimes served as stretcher bearers on the battlefield, carrying casualties. They might even have had to help doctors hold down patients during, amputations and other type things. They helped with supply, and they were also, well, in the worst possible scenario, sometimes they'd even have to pick up a musket. And many of these guys, I think the youngest drummer boy on record is about 9 years old. And they were not as old as these guys were as musicians by far, but I'm not going to get off on that right now. Oh, right now, what I'd like to do is play for you with my presenter here, what this drummer's call would sound like. Okay, so when a regiment was going to be on the move, all the companies had to get together. And all the drummers had to get together and then lead the troops. Well, this is the call that would get all the drummers together, and then they would have them all in one place at one time. So this is called the drummer's call. So when the percussionists would hear that, I keep doing that. When the percussionists would hear that, they would all come and they would be able to join. Now it's time to talk just a little bit about Camp Salomon itself. Now, Camp Salomon is named after the governor at the time was Edward Salomon. Okay, that's with an A, Salomon. And he started off coming to this country as a German immigrant. Now, here's why he's governor in 60, 62 through 64. He was a lieutenant governor for Lewis Harvey. Lewis Harvey was elected in 61. Unfortunately, Lewis Harvey passed away in late April of 62. And then his lieutenant governor was Salomon, so then he took on the governorship. Quickly, how he died after the Battle of Shiloh, in early part, 6th or so of April of 1862, Governor Harvey, at the time, organized supplies and things for the wounded soldiers and bandages and all that stuff, and he led. He took himself, he was going to escort all these supplies down to Tennessee. Pittsburgh Landing is the place that Shiloh is at. So they pull into Pittsburgh Landing with the boat. They put the gangplank out, okay? So Governor Harvey is finally getting there to deliver these most needed supplies of the wounded Wisconsin soldiers. He slips, he falls off the gangplank, topples into the Tennessee River, current takes him away, he drowns, he dies on this mission. And so that's how Edward Salomon became governor. So now let's move to Camp Salomon. Now you have the background on the name. Well, Camp Salomon is actually located about 2 miles south of La Crosse, or was then at the time. Now, what they do is, like I said before, they gather there, they do their drill, they outfit the supplies. These our guys would have been there doing all these things, and the records show that they had extremely high morale at that time. They were really high on what they were doing. I mean, they were so excited to be in the Army and fighting for the Union, and they're going to go fight and everything like that. So I'd like to read for you, to demonstrate that, an excerpt from the La Crosse Weekly Democrat. That's the name of the newspaper. This is dated September 8th, 1862. And I quote, "The camp is well liked by all. No better or prettier place can be found for such a purpose. The men are anxious to become perfect in drill and express a strong determination to become the best drilled which has ever left or shall leave our state. The tents are good, they're waterproof, and it looks like living to see the men so cheerful and so full of life. Hurrah for the 25th. Well, a couple things about that. I will say, first of all, remember at this point in the presentation that these guys are on the upswing. They're really high, because a little later, we're going to continue with the whole story, and we may have some other things to talk about. But right now, what might be one of the calls that they would have to learn to play when they're in camp? How about assembly? That makes sense. Let's do assembly. So this is how assembly goes when they want to have everybody fall out for a drill or whatever. So here we go. So that is the assembly call. Well, let's move ahead and let's go on to, things are going to be a little weird here, a little strange for the 25th for a while. Their first assignment, they're actually called up to go out to Minnesota on what is known as the Dakota War of 1862. Now, that again is another entire whole story and how it happened and why and the contributing factors. And I'd be happy to address that at another time. But for right now, we just simply say that the 25th Wisconsin was assigned to go out to Minnesota to kind of be policemen, safe, and guard little settlements, guard little white settlements along the way, and to actually see to it that there wasn't a lot of violence and a lot of attacks on white settlements. This picture demonstrates there's a lot of emotion in this picture for me when I look at this. But at any rate, the guys march up through, they leave. Remember now, they just got to Camp Solomon on the 14th of September. On the 19th of December, they get orders to go out to Minnesota. Okay, not south, not to fight the Confederates, to go out to Minnesota. Okay, fine. Well, they leave, and like I said, they march through Winona. They have over a 200-mile march. They all kind of get there, and what they do is they kind of disperse into the kind of the interior. They split up to do these guarding obligations. Now, another unit up there that I looked into earlier, I don't have much information right now, was the Wisconsin 30th, I think was up there as well. And another story of how General Pope got up there, but I'm not going to go there right now. But when they were there, this duty was mundane, it was boring, there was illness, the morale was suffering. They really, this isn't what they signed up for. And they had some sickness. So by the end of December, by the 26th of December, when the hostilities were kind of quelled, they were ordered back, and they marched back through Winona and over to Madison and to Camp Randall. So they're going to be doing more drill and marching right there. So if they're going to be doing more drill and more marching, I think what I'd like to play for you right now are two different real short calls. The first one is when you're marching and you want to change to go to the right, and the second one is when you're marching and you want the troops to go to the left. So the first one I'll play is when you're marching and you want the drums want to tell them to go to the right. And it goes like this. So when you want to go left, it's slightly different. They'd have to listen for this. And so I probably have to know their left from their right, but sometimes I have to ask myself that too. But anyway, if they hear that sound, if they hear those calls, they know what to do. Now, at this point in time, what I'd like to do is not actually change the slide for a moment. And the reason is I want to tell you about the next period of time and what happens with the 25th, and then I'll come right back with a new slide. Now, during this next period of time, of course, they're back to Camp Randall, and they're there for a couple months or so. So by February 20th, 1863 to May 31st, 1863, they actually get transferred down to Kentucky. They're at an army camp down there in Kentucky. It's called at Columbus. So it's Camp Columbus in Columbus, Kentucky. Now, this is kind of a staging area to bring troops together from different places, and there's a lot of camps like this. And they've got to get troops ready to be kind of en masse, because the next big thing that's coming down the pike from Grant is they're going to assault and put a siege on Vicksburg. They want to open up the Mississippi. They want to take that city that's so important to the South away from them, so that you can stop the shipping of supplies. But here's the deal. When they're down in Kentucky, this is really bad stuff. They are suffering from disease. Their morale is worse. They're really frustrated. They want to fight. So far, so that beginning morale. But what I'm going to do is, pretty soon, I'm going to move ahead now. And so the next thing that happens is they will indeed be engaged at Vicksburg. So after waiting and arranging and stuff, finally they get orders to move south. So the regiment will arrive outside of Vicksburg, and they will be assigned a certain assignment. And that is to be assigned to a place called Snyder's Bluff. Now, Snyder's Bluff is kind of overlooking Vicksburg on one of the bluffs. And so it's a position, and it's a position, high ground is always good for cannon or whatever. So they have a pretty important assignment. But here's what happened on the way on this march. One private in one of the diaries from the unit wrote, and I quote this: he wrote home, and it was a diary that later became public. He said, "This was the most dreadful hot march, and it's the hottest sun that I've ever felt. Sunstroke, different guys had sunstroke and illness. So marching was really those long distances tough." So, but on the way, they were ordered to do things like raise havoc with communications, destroy some bridges, just basically they call it foraging. And of course, foraging is foraging for your own food along the way. And dual purpose is you don't have to supply as much from your own side, and you're depriving the enemy of some of their resources on the other side. So there's a kind of a mastermind behind that. So when they got to Vicksburg, they were basically in a defensive kind of position, okay? So they were there until the 14th. Now, while they were marching, they probably had a couple, our drum, our artifact that we're trying to give a voice to today, probably had a couple of other calls that would have had to been played. And I bet that one of them is forward and one of them is halt. So the first one would be if you wanted your troops to move forward. Here's what the drums would do. So that would be forward. And if they want them to halt, this would be the halt. So that is actually probably played a lot, Now, some of these would be probably easier to memorize than others, but for the most part, that's that. Well, I'm going to hold on the next slide for just a second, if you don't mind, because now we're going to enter into another period of time that is kind of not as fun. It's kind of a miserable period of time. They're moved to another Army camp. The other Army camp is in Arkansas, and it's in Helena, Arkansas, so it's the Army camp there. So from July 31st, 1863 to January 29th, 1864, the regiment is being held kind of again in kind of a staging, gathering area. You see, Vicksburg had fallen, so now they're on to the next thing along the line. And so with their gathering troops in Arkansas, different places, their next actual thing that they're going to be working on is going to be a drive to the sea with General Sherman, which is known as Sherman's March to the Sea. And this operation will happen after they get enough troops together to do this. But at this camp, let me give you those dates just again. It was a long time. From January 31st, 1863, July 31st, all the way to the next January 29th, they're at Camp Helena, Arkansas. Again, this is one of the places where they lost a lot of people through disease. Their morale was not that good. Sanitation conditions were just horrible. There wasn't a lot of covering for all the soldiers and tentage. It really wasn't pleasant. And I'm going to take you into the next period of time real quickly before I move ahead. Again, because they're going to move them finally out of Camp Helena and move them back to Vicksburg, which is now a captured city. So from February 2nd, 1864 to May 1st of 1864, they're marched back to Vicksburg, to the captured city. They're held in reserve as the forces all begin to gather so that Sherman could put this all together and make his drive, the plan to cut the South in half and to make the South hollow is basically what Sherman said. But let's move on. Finally, they get a chance to move out. Finally, the Army moves. And you've heard the saying, be careful what you wish for, because it might come true. Okay, well, they've been yearning for the fight. They've been yearning to get into battle. And so that's about to start for them. So the next series is going to take you through a few things. They're going to see some battle. So the next one is at Resaca. At Resaca, they arrived on May 9th in Resaca, Georgia. As soon as they got there, immediately, according to official records, and I quote, they came to the aid of General Charles Ward. And he quotes, a general quotes this about the 25th Regiment. The 25th stood beautifully, holding the crest of the hill until the enemy retired. So they did really well by themselves there. And they got special commendation from General Ward. So I'm guessing that a call that might have been given when they get on site there and they're ready to take their positions, there's one called to the colors, which would you rally to the flag. So imminent danger, rally to the flag. So this call to the colors goes like this. So that would be the Battle of Resaca. Now at that, we could talk more about, actually, there's so much more you can't talk about with each one of these, but basically I have to stay focused because all these different places have stories of their own. Moving ahead though with the 25th, I bring you to the next place where they saw action. And this was Kennesaw Mountain. Kennesaw Mountain is in Georgia, and the battle there lasted between the 15th and the 27th of 1864. Now, the 25th, thankfully, was not involved with General Sherman's fated charge, which is still up in the air for determining if it was really needed. But General Sherman, I guess he wanted to force the issue, and I don't know, he got a little too brave, I guess, with his men. He sent several units on a frontal attack on the entrenched Confederates at Kennesaw Mountain. Now, the 25th Regiment was not involved with that, but in that charge, Sherman lost in 30 minutes, he lost 3,000 men. In the meantime, the 25th, thank God for them, was not involved in that, but they had positions kind of in the back, in the reserves. And what they did there, they did one evening on the 15th, I believe it was, they did have 2 times during the night, 2 night attacks that came against them, and they repulsed both of them, which was really good. And so when you retreat, sometimes you rally on your reserves, okay? You rally to the reserves to have a new line. So here's the call, which probably you would have heard at Kennesaw Mountain in June of 1864. Rally to the reserves. So next, we're going to keep moving here. So next, we're moving into Georgia. We're on the line of battle. We're in that march to the sea. We're every time we move, every time we march, we try to destroy something, a telegraph, a railroad track, anything to help to deprive the Confederates. When I say we, I mean the Union. So Decatur, Decatur, Georgia. Moving along the lines of attack, they get to Decatur, and our guys in the 25th are ordered to seize a supply train that the Confederates have. And it's their job. They're ordered to go and capture this train, and the train's carrying supplies and munitions and different things like that. Well, this is going to be a very, very dark day for the 25th. In fact, it's going to be the darkest day of killed in action for them for the whole war. Here's what happened. They go out there and they go out to attack and capture this train. In the meantime, a really large force of Confederate cavalry, a couple of regiments show up and they do a charge, and there's a ferocious battle ensues. As the battle happens, there's a terrific toll on our 25th Wisconsin. Like I say, it's the darkest day in the battlefield. On that day, they lost 14 killed, 65 wounded, and 27 were taken prisoner of war. On top of that, the Colonel Montgomery, you might remember him, he was mentioned earlier, he gets wounded and captured, and his wound is bad enough that his right arm has to be amputated. So he didn't have a good day at all. In the meantime, that means that Major Rusk, enter Rusk now, our 15th governor in 20 years, whatever, he takes command. And on top of everything else, a divisional commander, which is made up of regiments into brigades, into divisions, a division commander, a really big wig, a man by the name of General McPherson, a really well-loved and respected, one of the top generals, right, a tier or two right below Grant and those guys, he gets killed in that battle too. So this is in one of the privates' recollections home, in our letter home to Mom, he says, "This is the biggest battle of the summer, and it was a rout of the regiment." So I think we have to play retreat at this point in time, because during this, on the 22nd of July in 1864, there definitely was a retreat, okay? So here is retreat. So off they go. The next slide, so they retreat, of course, and when you retreat, you make a line. You make a defensive line that you don't get pushed back any further. So this is a picture of the next day after that battle at Decatur, where the rifle pits are being dug. Now, these are really elaborate rifle pits, and you can see there's two different kind of layers of it, so that, it's going to be hard to flank these rifle pits, because you see the one on the left-hand side of your screen is going to keep soldiers from having to make to come around that other side. And I guess I would mention to you at this point in time, this is what the 25th did the night of the 22nd and into the 23rd of July in 1864. They made these pits so that, right, when you get down in there, and don't they look a lot like, they look a heck of a lot like World War I, in Europe, 1914 through 18. And, a topic for another discussion another time might be some of those kind of inventions or strategies, or whatever you might call them, that got started during the Civil War that got perfected maybe over the years later, like the submarine, that kind of thing, or even the machine gun, the Gatling gun was like a forerunner. So again, another topic, another time. But boy, those sure look like trenches to me. So moving ahead, the Battle of Atlanta. Okay, so Atlanta is a railroad hub, okay? Atlanta is really important. So the siege of Atlanta actually was between July 31st and August 26th in 1864. Okay, so in a regimental report, it states that the 25th, and I quote, when they arrived on the field, they assisted in dislodging a large Confederate force on the hill outside Atlanta, and they held their position 500 yards away from the Confederate lines. Now, on the 14th, on that very day, I have a statistic for you. Try to imagine this. On the 14th of August in 1864, this regiment, these men of this regiment expelled, meaning shot, over 17,000 rounds of ammunition in one day. And this is also where a member of the Company C is getting special note, special commendation. His name is, he was a color bearer. Very dangerous job indeed. Talk more about that later if you want to. But this man's name is Private Pleasant Pritchett, and he is from Company C, and he actually got a commendation for his bravery in that battle. Now, I think because of all the ammunition shot, I think the best call to play right now would be commence firing. And commence firing sounds like this. It even has a kind of a sense of urgency to it, doesn't it? Audibly, you think, yeah. So Atlanta. But I want to move ahead now too. The next thing that's happening is now we're really getting into the Deep South. We're really on the approach, and Sherman is cutting a 65-mile wide swath of just total destruction, total devastation through the South. And for good or for bad, historically, for good or for bad, our boys are part of that, and our unit is. But I guess that's total war. That's war. So let me address Savannah for a second. Our guys, they marched and counter-marched and followed different railroad lines, and they tear up track here and move over there. And you can see in this picture here that you get up there and they start hacking away at the telegraph, and that's the email of the day and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, this is it. That you do something like that, you're losing your ears, So at this point in time, as some of the soldiers' personal recollections, as they're traveling through the South, doing these kind of activities on their way through the South, they're noticing that long lines of freed black people are following them in the nomenclature, freed slaves. We're following the army. They're following the wagons. They had been freed, but it's kind of like okay, and it's really a sad situation. And some of the boys wrote, I got to be honest, both plus and minus about that. Some had heartfelt sympathy. Others were kind of like, I don't know. It's bothersome. But at any rate, it's part of history to note that was what was happening. So on December 11th, they engaged the enemy at a place called Long Swamp in Savannah. They do have one man killed. But the Union forces entered Savannah on December 21st, 1864. And as you probably know, or the story goes, that Sherman wired Lincoln in Washington. And Sherman said, President Lincoln, I'll paraphrase, Merry Christmas. For your Christmas present, I present to you the city of Savannah. And so for some reason, for the most part, Savannah was spared total destruction, although there's records of evening fires breaking out. But it's not the total destruction. But I would think that the sergeants and the first sergeants and so on would probably get this call next, because this is called come for orders. And when they hear this is specifically a first sergeant's order to come for orders, and it goes like this. And when you hear that, that would mean that the higher-ups have some orders for you. So moving ahead then, we're going to move right here. Now, this is a map of the operations and the railroad systems in and around the greater Savannah area. And you can see Decatur on the map, far left, Atlanta. You can pretty much guess and see all that railroad stuff is what they're doing. And the goal was Savannah. So this is a map that kind of, in a different way, gives you a sense for the lay of the land, literally. So, so the map shows the railroad system. Now, there's a term out there that was used a lot of times, when the soldiers would tear apart the railroad tracks, or the rails on the side, and these big rails that go together in sections. And I think some of you might know where I'm going with this. They would put them crossways like this, like in a big bonfire, like in the middle of the rails. And then they get men on both sides, once it's red hot in the middle. And they'd literally take those and go like this with each one of those sides of those rails. And these are railroad rails. And they would bend them so they would be totally unusable. They're totally unfixable. And they were known as Sherman's bow ties, because that was part of Sherman's March to the Sea. Whoops. Yes, and I'm not going to move ahead quite yet on my next one, because I want to talk to you about the next series of events. But you can use this map kind of to actually follow my my description. The next series of events, there's going to be a series of skirmishes and battles that the 25th participates in. And it's all on their way kind of to complete the next once Savannah, they're going to move north into North Carolina, out of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and they're going to make their way up that side and really kind of tie the knot on the Confederacy. So the 25th was part of these following battles during this period of time. February 2nd, Rivers Bridge. February 9th, 65, Edistos River. Cindy and I were just down that neck of the woods a few years ago. Beautiful spot, and I remember the name of that river. February 18th, they went up to Columbus, which is the capital, and they disrupted the railroad system there. So there was a battle in Columbus. And then on March 8th, through the 21st, they helped to secure the North Carolina city of Goldsboro. So that's that next period of time. But moving ahead, in April, things change a lot. Up at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, Robert E. Lee will surrender. The forces formally surrender to Grant on April 9th. He'll be surrendering his Grand Army of Northern Virginia, and of course, all those tales on that Eastern Theater would be a topic for another time. But for right now, this affects what's going on down where our boys are. Our boys are down fighting a different commanding general. The general in charge of that Trans-Mississippian, is what they call the Confederate side down there, was Joe Johnson. And Joe Johnson's not ready to give up. He's going to stay in the field till the 26th. So here we are, go back to our boys in the 25th and our drum, and they find out that, the war is over. Lee surrendered. Goodness sakes, oh God, we get to go home. And the next thing you know, they find out that, but the guy you're facing here, his forces, they are just ready to, to kind of go quietly into the night, so to speak. So basically, they got to kind of be on guard till about the 26th. So they finally do capitulate, and Sherman accepts Johnson's surrender on the 26th of April. Now, during this period of time, something else really tragic and historically memorable happens. On the 15th, President Lincoln is assassinated in Washington, Ford's Theater. So the president is shot and killed during this time frame, right in this area. So basically, our 17th president of the United States, President Johnson, Andrew Johnson, takes the reins. And that plays into our next slide, and with our guys, because he is the one that plans the Grand Washington Review. This will happen in Washington between the 23rd and 25th of May. Our 25th Wisconsin soldiers will have made their way all the way up there by the 24th. So our guys do take part in this grand event. Now, I love this picture. You got the Capitol back there. Some of these old photographs are cool, kind of foggy, but it does give, like Cindy said too when we were talking about this, it does give an idea of some of the building and architecture. So there's Washington, there's the Grand March, the Grand Review. Now, all these troops, earlier in the presentation, I was talking about, the camp in Kentucky and then the camp, in Arkansas, where our guys went on staging areas before big military operations. Well, one of the biggest military kind of gatherings really of all time then in this whole time frame was everyone coming to Washington for that grand review. So they needed miles and miles and miles of open space for camping of the, for tents for all the soldiers. So our boys were camped at a place called Crystal Springs, Maryland. Now, Crystal Springs is 4 miles north of Washington. So, you can imagine how much room they needed for all these pieces of armies coming in. So in Crystal Springs on June 7th, 1865, our boys, along with all the other Wisconsin, or all the 25th Regiment, they were paid, they were formally disbanded, formally dismissed, or in other words, mustered out, and then okay, so they were done. So let's move on to the next. Oh, excuse me. So while they were there, get too excited here, having too good of a time, I guess. So while they were there, there would have been plenty of generals floating around. So they would have had to acknowledge the general with their drums when they see it. So this one's called the general. So when they see a general, they're supposed to acknowledge it by going. So that would be, hello, General. And so the next one I wanted to show you was, let's do a little kind of review action here. Our 25th, I told you earlier in my opening comments, or somewhere's up there, that we're going to travel through much of, I guess I lied a little bit because some of it took us to the western side of the Mississippi, but most of the actions were on the eastern side of the Mississippi, except for that business up there in Minnesota. So this map shows, starting off in La Crosse, and and you can follow it all the way down through, down south, back, counter march, going back to Vicksburg, like I said, and then east again, over to Savannah and back up. And there's Washington, and then you can see, I'll give you some stats here. So they actually, this traces from September 4th, 1862 until June 11th, 1865. Now on June 11th, 1865, these guys will arrive back at Camp Randall in Madison. And from there, they'll all be dispersing themselves to go back to their home reunions and their home celebrations, and they'll all be going back going there. So to kind of close on the 25th, some final stats on this regiment. The 25th lost more men during the Civil War. They lost more men of any other Wisconsin regiment during the Civil War, okay, of any other Wisconsin regiment. Their percentage was 32.5% died. However, 414 out of the 471 total deaths, 414 were by disease. Now recall that those times of inactivity and poor conditions and all those other kind of camps, they lost more men sitting around doing nothing in terrible conditions than they did when they finally got into battle, with the exception of that July 22nd, when they were in Decatur, Georgia. So we're going to finish kind of some things up here, pulling it together. Now here's where I'm going to move quick. I know I'm getting close, but I need to finish just a couple quick things. Here is a scene of Beetown, where they're coming back to. This is circa 1865. Now, Beetown in the 1860 census had a population of 1,481. Now, this is their coming back home. So this photo actually was, when my wife Cindy saw it, she jokingly said, gee, it must be either Sunday or, maybe they're all in the saloons. So I don't know. But at any rate, that's Beetown in 1865. But here's my point. You get to a point like this in a story, we know some things up to this point. Enlistment, where they went, this and that. They really came home. But there's a big, big empty spot. And I hope some of this can come to light in the future. And it would be nice to know what they did after the service. I do know they were married. I do know some things, but I don't know what they did, what occupation, what kind of things could actually come into their story, what their family life was like, their post-war experiences, and so on. So as usually is generally the case with most things, It seems like the more you start to know, it's really the less you know, or the more you need to know, I should say. So this is one of those examples. But we do know some things, and I'm going to move ahead. We do know where both of these gentlemen are buried. So this is the gravestone of Burt Sumner, who was born in 1839 and lived quite a nice long life. To 1924, he passed at age 85. He is buried in Hillside Cemetery in Lancaster, Wisconsin. And it looks like his wife's name is Irene. So we have stuff there. We do know some things. And then, of course, the other gentleman, James M. McCormick, was his full middle name, Hayden. There's his gravestone. Looks like he had a wife, Cordelia. He's buried in Bloomington at Providence Cemetery. Now, both guys, the records show that they both were born in Grant County. Now, I'm going to close things up kind of with the same picture in a way that I started with. So in closing, I want to thank you also very much for sharing some of your evening with me and giving me a chance to have all this fun. And anytime I get a chance to play a drum, I mean, I don't care if it's 150 years old or if it's the one that came off the rack tomorrow. This is great. I want to thank Erik. I want to thank the staff. I want to thank all the volunteers at the museum. I actually, I really, really appreciate the fact that we can have these programs. I want to thank the Platteville community for supporting the history and the arts and the culture. And we have such a wonderful community. I want to give special thanks before I go. I really have to. I don't know what I would have done without Cindy. She has graduated from typing term papers to doing seminar papers, and now she's like a whiz at PowerPoint. So I don't know what I'm going to have to do. If I may have to get her a new car or something, but I owe her so much. So thank you, Cindy. To end with, I think the only thing that I'm going to say here is we have to end this, and we're going to end it with probably the most appropriate call for the ending of things. And I want to give my co-presenter the last word. And the last word is going to be a call named ceasefire, because we are done and we are going to cease fire. And so here is ceasefire. So with that, Erik, I guess I'll turn it over to you. I think I went a little over, so many apologies to you guys.
Oh, that's fabulous, Jeff. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, so many people have been sending in very positive comments about the sounds of the drum, as well as your very engaging talk. Applause, applause. You have some questions. Are you ready to hear a couple of them, Jeff?
I sure am. I'll give my best. I'll give it my best.
Give it your best. Okay. Patrick asks, first, if you could talk a bit about the drumsticks, their shape, and if that's typical of the Civil War, and then also the sound of the drum being very deep compared to a snare drum, and wondering if that's what would typically be doing the drum calls in the Civil War.
Okay. Well, thank you, Patrick, for that question, and those are great questions. These drumsticks, the shape, all I can say on these is these are the authentic shape. They're weighted in the back, and I think that's just because with the weight in the back, my guess is that they will be more powerful in the front by transferring that weight. I know I didn't bring modern day drumsticks with me, Patrick, but you know the difference. And the reason I think is because also when you're playing like a bass drum or some other larger drum, these butts can also be playing heads. They can be heads. I don't want to get too windy, but a great story, Patrick. Asked me sometime about Gettysburg and the wonderful antique dealer guy that Cindy and I visited with several years ago is where I bought these drumsticks in Gettysburg. And your second question was the drum. Now, here's the deal. Yes, well, Patrick, both the one upstairs and the one down here are snares. If I pulled this one up and showed you the bottom, there would be catgut snares. Here's the problem. These drums are 100 and whatever years old. Those catgut snares are really loose. They're supposed to have a snary sound. So if there's any consolation in this answer about this drum sounding like a field drum or a tom-tom, take my word for it. It has snares on it. The one upstairs does. It's just that You have to completely work with calfskin heads and catgut snares to make them work. And if they sit, they're going to all sound like a parade drum. So Patrick, that would be my answer to that.
Wonderful. Corey says that that's such an interesting presentation of history and drumming, and it reminds her of what it was like to have you, Jeff, as her band director in the 1980s, teaching mixed with stories.
Well, thank you, and I believe me, I've learned as much from you as you might have learned from me, and thank you so much for that. That's the gift that keeps on giving. If you're a teacher, thank you so much for that.
Very nice. Pat asks, how many drummers would be in a regiment?
Oh, great. Well, you know, it depends. First of all, regiments don't always have 10 companies where like a drummer or two a piece, like a drum would make 10. Let's say for the 25th would have 10 drummers. Other regiments in the North might have 8. Now in the South, typically, companies of men are less men. That makes less men. When you put them all together, for regiments, less men, for brigades, divisions, corps, armies. So it would matter a little bit how many companies they had. So if a company of, I would say with the Wisconsin, the 25th, it's quite likely they had 10 drummers.
Mike asks, how would soldiers hear the drum calls over rifle shooting?
That's really good, because a lot of times, all I can say is, yes, it's confusing. Battlefields are confusing. There's a lot of friendly fire going on when you read about Civil War battles. And sadly, there's a lot of mismovements and misinterpreting uniforms and all that. But your question pertains to how they could hear the drum. Well, first of all, let me put it to you this way. There's a better chance hearing the drum over the din of battle than the scream of a hollering of a commander, because on top of his voice, move left, move right, or whatever, he's got also to contend with that riflery and the cannons and all the other kind of stuff, and all the screams of the men and the hollering of the men. So the only thing that might stand a chance of cutting through would be the drum, or in some cases, of course, obviously there are bugle calls, but that's a topic for another night.
Great. You've got a couple of compliments here. Terry, thanks you for your wonderful presentation. Robert adds, great presentation. And how have you remained so youthful and darn good looking throughout all these years?
I can tell you, because my wife is actually in the room with me, thank goodness. It's if you marry the right woman, you're going to stay. Now, if you marry, I got to stop right there. If you make mistakes, you can always fix them. But I'm lucky. I guess I'm making a kind of a joke, but I'm really serious. A good partner is great. I don't know. I look at myself in the mirror, and I'm not really convinced that I'm young looking. But thank you so much. Give me your name and address. Give you your address, and I'll send you the bride money. So
nice. Let's see. Patrick says the Chattanooga National Military Park has a monument for a Wisconsin division, and they attribute the state's motto "Forward" to a charge by Wisconsin troops that helped change the tide at Chattanooga. He adds the motto was adopted in 1851, so would have predated the Civil War. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I'm glad for that information, Patrick. We've been to Chattanooga with our family, and have enjoyed the bend there and the river and the battle above the clouds with Lookout Mountain and all that, and Missionary Ridge. I have probably seen that monument. It's a great tram to take up there too, and if you haven't done it, maybe you have. I don't have too much more to comment on that. I thank you for adding some information to our story. Chattanooga was indeed a very important place to secure on the Tennessee, on the river there, with from the Confederates. So yes, I spend as much time as I can, and hopefully in the near future more, traveling and getting a chance to view these places. And thank you for adding that information. I think that would be very accurate. Thank you. And then later, Patrick, Was it Patrick that asked that?
Yes.
Patrick, remind me sometime, ask me about how the Wisconsin Iron Brigade got its name at the Battle of South Mountain. And I will, so that would be another, that's just before Antietam. So you and I might have something to chat about there. So thanks, Patrick.
Jeffrey asks about how the snares are made. He says you mentioned that the snares were made of cat gut,
Yeah.
and does that make a the rattling noise?
Yeah, okay, great. Now I'm gonna try this, okay? I want you to, there you go. I think I can do this. So there are the snares, and Patrick, to your earlier question, you see how loose they are. They're not, they're lucky to actually be there. A lot of the antique percussion of the time doesn't even have the snares. I will address catgut and right now. Now, this is funny because when I was growing up, I'd hear this catgut thing and I think, oh, those poor cats, I just love cats, and we've got two of our own. But it's not catgut. It's spelled the same. It's cat spelled the same way. Here's the deal. The snares are made of a tough material. It's the lining of the intestines of animals like goats, donkeys, horses, sheep, oh gosh, all those they're going to take the intestines, strip them, dry them. Here's the thing about rawhide and intestine and things like that. For any of you folks that have tanned deer hide or whatever, once you wet it, it's pliable. I mean, these heads are calf skin. If we were to wet these, I wouldn't do it now because they're old, but new calf skin, if you wet it, it's pliable. You can stretch it on anything, you can tighten it down. And what it will do, it will keep the same shape when it dries and just be tougher than nails. Same deal on that catgut. You gotta wet it, you gotta stretch it. And believe me, if we had new catgut made out of that material, the natural material, we would be hearing a snare. And in fact, I can guarantee you that if we played the one upstairs, it would sound like this, even though it has snares on it. So that's the answer to that.
Dave Allen asks how the drum was cared for and maintained during its time in the field.
Oh my, well, I thought okay. Gosh, I think what it would basically be the guys, they would have oil skin, or what's the haversacks and the different bags that they had. It has a kind of an oil type of covering on leather, oil skin. It's to be rain resistant, and I think they had cases that they were able to put them in and carry them along in a covered case. I mean, if nothing else, canvas. But yes, these aren't made to be really maltreated. There's a certain delicacy about them, Dave. You're right, and so they actually did have to take very good care of them. This one is a restored snare, Dave, and this has been done professionally by a dear friend, and it is done in the correct manner. So that's not, I went off there, but you know me, Dave. I won't stay on that topic very long that you asked. But basically, yes, they would have to care for those drums with those coverings. Otherwise, weather and everything else, you get the head wet, it gets all soggy, and then you can't do rolls and that kind of stuff. So you can picture how you'd have to take care of them. Thanks for the question, Dave.
Joyce says, great job, Jeff, and says, to a novice ear, the different drum calls sound quite similar. How were the troops trained to hear the difference?
Right, and I thought the same thing too, Joyce. When I was, by the way, that original notation you might have noted on that screen, that came from an actual 1862 manual that General Silas Casey wrote so that everyone could have uniform calls. You see, I forgot to mention that in the presentation. But the reason that there had to be uniform calls is because it transfers this, that, and the other thing. The Union Army, if it's retreat, it can't be one retreat this way and one in a different unit, because that'd be real chaos. But yes, Joyce, I noticed that too, that a lot of them are very, very similar. I will tell you this, and I don't know if I know some of them, you put an R, it's a roll. If you put an F, it's a flam. They're all written differently. They come across sounding somewhat similar, but I think it might also be the time and place. Let's say you're on the march you're not going to hear a ceasefire, even though it might sound like something else. Let's say you're in the middle of a battle. This, probably my best answer, I'm guessing, is that, you're responding to whatever your environment is. So you wouldn't be responding to an assembly when you're already assembled. And so yeah, there's that. But believe me, I noticed the same thing. Thanks for the question, Joyce.
Oh, Tom and Kay Young, compliment your program, and thank you and Cindy so much. Mike Mayer asks, did Civil War veterans receive any special benefits for their service?
They did, Mike. And by the way, Mike, I'm really looking forward to your presentation as well as the other two that are coming along. So I thank you for that question. Yes, they they received pensions. And again, this is another time for another longer story, but briefly, they were given pensions, and at their death, their widow received pension. Now, some of the guys, the way, I don't know, want to make a blanket statement, but I've read many times where they've had difficulty getting their pensions and proving that, and you'd get a certain pension if you're disabled or if you're, whatever. But just basically, when you left, you would have a pension. The widow actually would be the recipient of that pension. And like I said, that's a topic for another whole time. But yeah, there was compensation given to the soldiers.
And Mike Ryder asks, would Confederate drummers copy the calls of Union drums?
I don't have information. I can't answer that they did or didn't, but in my small amount of logical mind, which is not all that huge, I'm guessing that out of not wanting to cause confusion on their own battle, I'll put it this way: I think the halting and the marching and the that sort of stuff could be really similar. It probably would be extremely similar, but I'm wondering if on the battlefield they might have had some other slightly different calls. But drum calls, again, it could bear a little bit more research to dig in on that, and that might be something I would look into. I would happy to look into it. It's an interesting notion. I'm guessing that there's some similarities, but they probably have their own calls.
We've got a few more notes of thanks and compliments, and then perhaps a closing question here. Cheryl says, "Thank you for an interesting presentation, Mike Mayer. Awesome job. You're an exceptional historian and a passionate one." And Dave Allen's, "Great job, Jeff. Once a teacher, always a teacher."
Thanks, Dave.
Patrick asks about the drums behind you.
Yeah.
He notices the rope lugs on the drums behind you. When did they switch to steel?
Okay. Yes. Well, Patrick, there's three kinds of styles of drums that fit the Civil War genre. And I'm glad that you brought this up. Let's see. This one right here on the left-hand side of your screen has ropes that go through the rim, as well as the small metal one here have ropes through the rim. I've always thought them to be Confederate drums. Now, first my thought. The ropes through the rim, the clamps, like the one I played here, and the clamps on this one here, that the rope goes to, that's another style, but it's totally legitimate. Now, the one upstairs, and you're right to note this, Patrick, that has one slight difference. That does have like a bar between the two sides. All three styles were appropriate for the Civil War. And when you say about when things go from one to another, Patrick, remember like in music history, you say, okay, when did Baroque stop, classical start? When did classical end in romantic? And then, it isn't like you drive up to the stop sign and you go like this, and then you go all of a sudden, it's all of a sudden classical, and then all of a sudden you stop and it's romantic. There's a period of composers and such. In the same manner, when styles change and when styles of drums change, it doesn't just happen on one kind of time frame. So all of them were appropriate for Civil War use. If that's an appropriate enough answer.
Excellent answer. Thank you, Jeff. And in conclusion, Patrick says, and I'd like to also echo this idea that we appreciate how you've developed the intersection between history and the discipline of music, and it really helped to bring the subject to life.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And the universal language, and some of you former students out there and so on might remember this, is, the universal language that we all share is music and the arts. It's a universal language that transcends us as mere humans. We communicate that way. So in order to get an idea across, words are great and examples are super. A lot of times it's the emotion that can be derived through the use of other means, and that you can get through the arts, and that you can get through, I know I'm biased, through music. And let's face it, drums are cool.
Drums are indeed cool, and you are the coolest. And it's been wonderful to have you as our speaker for this Lyceum. And thank you so much, Jeff.
Thanks, Erik. It was like really great. It was really a great experience that I don't even know if I can sleep tonight because I had so much fun.
Oh, wonderful. Now, Jeff, you might be interested in next week's Lyceum, and others might also be interested in tuning in. We're going to shift gears a little bit and move into the realm of science, history that's being made right now. You may know that on February 18th, NASA landed a new rover on the surface of Mars. It is called Perseverance. And on next Sunday, March 7th, Becky Williams, who lives just down the road here, presents Curiosity, Paving the Way for Perseverance. And is going to be sharing some of what this rover has been seeing here in these first 2 weeks on the surface of Mars. So it should be very exciting. I hope that you'll tune in. We will have 3 more after next week, so we're just getting started. The last one won't be till March 28th. Thank you so much for participating, and look forward to seeing you next week. Good night.
At Taco John's, we're blowing up your phone with great deals. The only problem is how many there are.
Crunching, 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 crunching.
Sorry, not sorry. Taco John's. Bigger, bolder, better.